An Australian army digger and his German shepherd emerged from the shimmering heat of the outback alone. Running for their lives, the man's uniform was torn, and the dog's paws were raw from the burning red sand. They were never meant to escape, but on a lonely stretch of the Eyre Highway, behind a massive road train, a relentless predator in a black car was closing in. No one saw them coming. No one believed they would survive. But a stranger saw their desperation, and she remembered what it meant to fight for mateship. What happened next will make you cry and believe in second chances, even for those who were betrayed by their own blood. Before we begin, tell me where you are watching from. Drop your country in the comments below. And if you believe that no soldier, human or animal, should be left behind, hit that subscribe button because this story might just restore your faith and loyalty. The Eyre Highway across the Nullarbor Plain did not just earn the title of the straightest, flattest road in Australia, it demanded it. Under the merciless January sun, the bitumen was less a road and more a dark scar cutting across the bleached skin of the vast continent. Heat waves shimmered off the tarmac, turning the distant horizon into trembling mirages that looked like puddles of mercury, promising water that never existed. It was a landscape of ancient silence where the only sound for 100 kilometers might be the wind whistling through saltbush or the rhythmic, guttural thrum of a diesel engine. For Matilda Tilly Hogan, this silence was not a burden. It was a sanctuary. Tilly was a woman carved from the same rugged geology as the plains she traversed. At 58, her face was a topographic map of deep creases earned through decades of squinting into the sun and weathering storms. Both meteorological and personal, she was a formidable woman. Strong and solid, with hands that looked like they could change a tire on a road train but were surprisingly gentle when handling something delicate or someone broken. Her hair, once a sun-bleached blonde, was now the color of steel wool, tied back in a no-nonsense ponytail she had adopted out of practicality. She wore her grief like her faded flannelette shirts, comfortable, familiar, and worn daily. She had been a different woman once, a woman who laughed easily and slept soundly next to her husband, Jack. But cancer had taken Jack 10 years ago, a slow erosion of her heart. Then the peacekeeping mission in some dusty, godforsaken corner of the world had taken Ben, her only son. 5 years later, that had been the landslide that buried whatever joy was left. Now Tilly lived in the cab of her 2018 Kenworth T909. It was polished chrome and bull bars on the outside, a pristine monastery on the inside. It was the only place where the ghosts did not scream quite so loud. She shifted gears, the glorious mechanical symphony of the Kenworth vibrating through the soles of her worn work boots. She preferred this route precisely because it was empty. Out here, there was no one to ask her why she still set a cup of black coffee on the passenger side dashboard every morning for a boy who would never drink it. The silence of the outback was honest. It did not offer platitudes. It did not say he is in a better place. It just was. She glanced up at the sun visor clipped there, unaffected by the brutal Australian UV rays that faded everything else. Was a photograph. Private Ben Hogan, forever 22, smiling with that invincible grin that only young men who have not yet seen war possess. He was clean-cut, his dress uniform sharp enough to cut glass, a stark contrast to Tilly's current rugged reality. "Hot one today, love," Tilly murmured. Her voice was gravelly, like tires on a gravel shoulder. She did not expect an answer, but the ritual of speaking to Ben kept the crushing weight of solitude at bay. It was a fragile equilibrium. She drove to keep moving because stopping meant thinking, and thinking was a dangerous road that led back to a flag-draped coffin and a folded slouch hat presented to her by a sombre officer whose boots were too shiny for a funeral. This road, this endless stretch of the Eyre Highway, was her penance and her peace. She hauled steel beams this trip, heavy, unyielding, much like herself. The weight felt good behind her. It gave her traction. The mesmerizing monotony of the white centerline flashing by was hypnotic. Mile after mile of grey-green spinifex and cracked red earth. Most drivers hated it. They needed the chatter of the UHF radio or blaring music to stay awake. Tilly needed the quiet. It was in this quiet that she felt the tether. That strange, inexplicable connection she still felt to soldiers. Anytime she saw a young man or woman in uniform at a roadhouse, she would quietly pay for their meal without them knowing. It was her way of still being a mother. But out here, 50 kilometers west of the nearest roadhouse, there should not be anyone. That is why the anomaly on the horizon snagged her attention instantly. At first, it was just a black speck, dancing in the heat haze like a glitch in reality. A dingo, maybe too tall, a kangaroo, too dark, as the Kenworth thundered closer, closing the gap at 100 kilometers an hour. The speck resolved into two distinct shapes. It was not wildlife, it was a man, and he was running. Running in this heat, This far from civilization was not exercise, it was a death wish. Tilly squinted, her instincts honed by millions of kilometers on Australian roadways prickling with unease. The figure was not just jogging. There was a desperate, frantic cadence to his gait. He was stumbling, recovering, and pushing forward with an energy that screamed of adrenaline rather than stamina. As Tilly drew nearer, details emerged from the shimmering haze. The runner was wearing clothes that did not belong in a civilian world. Mottled greens and browns, dirt-streaked and torn fatigues. Military issue. The recognition hit Tilly's gut like a physical blow, tightening her grip on the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white. But the man was not alone. Loping beside him, tethered by an invisible bond of loyalty rather than a leash, was a dog. Even from this distance, the animal was magnificent. A large German shepherd. Its black and tan coat was dusty, but its movement was fluid and efficient. Unlike the man who looked like he was fleeing a nightmare, the dog moved with purpose. It occasionally looked back, not with fear, but with vigilance. It was pacing the man, guarding his flank, a four-legged soldier ensuring its charge did not fall. A cold spike of adrenaline pierced through the lethargy of Tilly's long drive. She had seen breakdowns before. Families standing helplessly by overheated SUVs. Tourists with flat tires who did not know a wheel nut from a wheel brace. This did not look like a breakdown. This looked like an escape. The man in fatigues was not running to something. He was running from something. In the vast, empty theatre of the Nullarbor Plain, there was nothing behind him but miles of burning bitumen. Yet, he ran as if the devil himself was snapping at his heels. Tilly's eyes darted to her mirrors. Nothing, just the long empty road she had just travelled. But the feeling in her gut, that same heavy, leaden feeling she had the morning the two army officers had walked up her driveway, intensified. It was the intuition of a woman who knew tragedy intimately. Something was profoundly wrong. The heat waves distorted the running pair again, making them look like ghosts flickering in and out of existence. But the desperate reality of their flight was undeniable. Tilly lifted her heavy boot off the accelerator, the sudden change in engine pitch breaking the desert's trance. She did not know who they were, but she knew one thing for certain. They were in trouble, and out here, trouble was a death sentence if no one stopped. The man running was 28-year-old Lachlan Lockie O'Neill, though the sun and his own haunted mind had aged him into a spectre of someone much older. He was lean to the point of emaciation, his frame a scaffolding of sharp bones barely held together by taut, sun-baked skin. His face, currently smeared with stripes of dried red mud and sweat that mimicked war paint, was dominated by eyes that were too wide, too bright, pools of panicked sapphire that were not seeing the Australian saltbush, but rather the burning sands of a foreign land he thought he had left behind 3 years ago. He wore remnants of his old life, torn cargo pants that had once been standard-issue camouflage, now just stained shades of brown, and a tattered olive-drab t-shirt clinging to his heaving chest. He did not just look tired, he looked hunted. Every muscle was coiled tight, a hair trigger away from shattering. The heat was a physical weight on his shoulders, a familiar, oppressive blanket that smelled of burning diesel and ancient dust, triggering neurons that fired warnings of imminent ambushes. To Lockie, the approaching rumble of Tilly's Kenworth was not a potential rescue. It was the thrum of a low-flying drone, or perhaps an enemy convoy. He clamped his hands over his ears, stumbling sideways off the bitumen into the loose gravel, his boots slipping. Incoming, he choked out, the words scraping his parched throat like broken glass. The world was tilting, colors overly vivid, sounds magnified until they caused physical pain. He was drowning in dry air. Beside him, Kaiser was a study in canine devotion, pushed to its absolute limit. A 5-year-old German shepherd with a coat the color of black smoke and burnt timber. Kaiser was built for endurance. But even he was faltering. His thick fur was matted with burrs and dust, his tongue lolling far out of the side of his mouth, dripping thick saliva in a desperate attempt to cool down. His paws, toughened by duty but not invincible, were raw from the searing tarmac. Yet when Lockie stumbled, Kaiser did not continue forward. He instantly spun around, ignoring his own desperate thirst. He whined, a high-pitched sound that cut through Lockie's hallucination. Kaiser nudged Lockie's knee hard with his wet nose, a grounding technique he had been trained for, a physical anchor to pull his handler back from the precipice of a flashback. When Lockie did not respond, Kaiser barked, sharp, demanding. It was not a bark of aggression, but of urgent care. Stay with me here now. The dog's golden brown eyes were filled with an almost human intelligence and deep, unrestrained worry. He leaned his entire body weight against Lockie's legs, offering physical support to keep the man from collapsing entirely into the dust. Kaiser was the only reality Lockie had left, the only thing that was not a terrifying phantom. Tilly eased off the accelerator, the majestic Kenworth's engine braking system letting out a guttural, rolling growl that unfortunately only served to terrify the man further. Through the bug-splattered windshield, Tilly finally got a clear look, and her heart hammered against her ribs. It was worse than she thought. The kid looked broken. It was the same look she had seen in the eyes of soldiers returning from their third or fourth tours. The 1,000-yard stare where the soul seems to have vacated the body, leaving only raw instinct behind. Tilly saw the dog's vest now, faded and dusty with the barely legible patch. Service animal, do not pet. This was not just a hiker in trouble. This was a veteran in active crisis. Tilly knew she could not just blast her air horn and wave them over. That might send the kid bolting into the open scrub to die of exposure. She had to be gentle. She began to downshift, preparing to pull the massive rig onto the precarious shoulder, a maneuver that risked getting stuck in the soft sand. But she did not care. She had to help. Just as Tilly began to turn the wheel, a flash of movement in her side mirror caught her eye. It did not belong. The road behind her had been empty for the last hour, but now something had detached itself from the horizon. It was a car, sleek and low to the ground. A black Holden HSV GTS. Its windows heavily tinted, absorbing the sunlight rather than reflecting it. It looked like a bruise on the landscape. What made the hair on Tilly's arms stand up was not the car itself, but how it was moving. It was not speeding past. It was crawling. The Holden was matching the runner's pace, staying about 50 meters back, rolling ominously along the shoulder, kicking up a small cloud of red dust. It was predator behavior, stalking, waiting for the prey to finally collapse. Kaiser sensed it first. The dog spun away from Lockie, facing the dark vehicle. The fur along his spine bristled into a rigid ridge. He lowered his head, teeth bared in a silent, lethal snarl before letting out a guttural, vibrating growl that seemed too deep for a dog his size. It was a sound of pure primal defense. The predator had been spotted. Tilly did not waste a second. The moment Kaiser's growl vibrated through the air, a primal warning that transcended species. Tilly understood the stakes. This was not a roadside assistance call, it was an extraction. She slammed the Kenworth's gear stick, maneuvering the road train with a surprising, terrifying grace. The massive rig groaned as she swung it diagonally across the shoulder, positioning the trailer as a steel barricade between the runner and the approaching black Holden. It was a move born of impulse, a protective instinct she had not used since Ben was in high school. Shielding her son from a footy player twice his size, she popped the air brakes, the hiss loud and sharp in the Outback silence, and leaned across the vast expanse of the cab to shove the passenger door open. "Hop in," she roared, her voice rough with urgency, cutting through the shimmering heat. "Now, love, move it." Lockie froze. The open door of the truck loomed like the maw of another trap. His mind, fractured by trauma, screamed conflicting orders. Trust no one. Everyone is a threat. The truck is a cage. He stumbled back, eyes darting wildly from the open cab to the endless exposed plain. But Kaiser did not hesitate. The German shepherd, sensing the imminent danger of the stalking car more acutely than Lockie's paralyzed indecision, made the choice for him. With a powerful leap, Kaiser cleared the high metal steps and landed squarely on the passenger seat, instantly turning to bark at Lockie, a sharp, commanding sound that brooked no argument. "Safe. Here, come." It was the anchor Lockie needed. Trusting the dog more than his own shattered perceptions, Lockie scrambled up the steps, his boots slipping on the metal grating, adrenaline lending him a final burst of frantic strength. He practically fell into the cab, landing hard against the dashboard, smelling of old sweat, fear, and the metallic tang of adrenaline. "Door!" Tilly yelled, already reaching for the gear shift. Lockie slammed the heavy door shut just as the black Holden accelerated. The predator had realized its prey was escaping. The matte black car roared forward, a sleek missile of malice, aiming to cut him off before they could merge back onto the highway. Tilly did not give it the chance. She floored the accelerator, the massive diesel engine bellowing its defiance. The Kenworth shuddered, tires fighting for traction on the loose gravel before biting into the bitumen with a screech. They lurched onto the road, the sudden momentum pinning Lockie and Kaiser back against the seat. In the rearview mirror, Tilly caught a fleeting glimpse of the driver of the Holden. It was a face twisted in pure, unadulterated rage. Julian O'Neill, even distorted by the mirror and the distance. The family resemblance to the terrified man next to her was chillingly undeniable. Julian pounded his fist against his steering wheel, a silent pantomime of fury before flooring it to stay glued to their bumper. He was a man used to getting his way, a man whose perfectly tailored suits usually hid the ruthless aggression he was now displaying openly. Beside him in the Holden sat another figure, shadowy and indistinct, but radiating a sinister calmness that contrasted with Julian's explosive anger. Inside the cab, the air was thick with tension. Kaiser, despite his exhaustion, did not lie down. He stood on the passenger seat, his body acting as a physical barrier between Lockie and the rest of the world. His eyes fixed on the mirrors, watching the black car that trailed them like a relentless shadow. Lockie was hyperventilating, his hands gripping his knees so tightly his knuckles were white. "They found us," he whispered, the words barely audible over the roar of the engine. "They always find us." Tilly risked a glance at him, her heart aching with a familiar, terrible pain. She did not know the details yet, but she knew enough. She reached over and turned up the air conditioning, a small gesture of comfort in a situation that offered little. "Not today, love," Tilly said, her voice a low, steady rumble that seemed to merge with the truck's engine. "Not on my watch." The interior of the Kenworth cab, usually a sanctuary of hushed diesel hum and country ballads, had transformed into a pressurized containment unit for raw human terror. Lachlan O'Neill was huddled against the passenger door as far as the confined space would allow, his body vibrating with a frequency that seemed to rattle the very bolts of the truck. He was not just scared, he was shattering. His eyes, wide and unseeing, darted around the cab, unable to lock onto anything solid, treating the familiar comforts of Tilly's mobile home, the neatly made sleeper bunk, the UHF radio, the affixed picture of Ben, as potential threats. Every time Tilly shifted gears, Lockie flinched as if he had heard a bolt slide forward on a rifle. Kaiser remained between them, a stalwart island of calm in the chaotic sea of his handler's mind. The dog was exhausted, his tongue lolling, panting heavily, but he did not break his vigil. He kept one heavy paw firmly pressed on Lockie's thigh, a constant physical reminder. "I am here, you are real." Tilly kept her eyes on the road, but her peripheral vision was filled with the heartbreaking tableau next to her. She did not need a full confession to understand what was happening. 20 years of raising a son and burying him had taught Tilly the universal language of pain. She recognized the uniform Lockie wore, not just the pattern, but the way it hung on him, a second skin that had become a straitjacket of memories. She saw the O'Neill name tag stitched over the breast pocket, stained with sweat and red dirt. Deep breaths. "Son," Tilly said, her voice a low, steady rumble, deliberately pitched to be non-threatening. "You are safe in here. That steel behind us, it will stop a tank." Lockie tried to respond, but the words fractured in his throat. Not safe," he choked out, clawing at the fabric of his own pants. "Julian," he said, "the doctors, they weren't doctors." The words tumbled out in a chaotic stream, devoid of linear time. Zip ties in the bag. Kaiser knew. They tried to kick Kaiser. At the mention of his name, the German shepherd let out a low, rumbling growl, his ears flattening against his skull. It confirmed everything Tilly needed to know. You do not kick a service dog unless you are trying to neutralize a threat. And you do not bring zip ties to a medical intervention. Tilly pieced it together as she drove, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. She watched the black Holden in her mirrors, a persistent, venomous beetle scuttling behind her massive rig. "Julian," Tilly said, testing the name. "That who is driving the black car? Your brother?" Lockie flinched violently at the name. "He needs the money, Mum and Dad's money. The trust said I was incompetent, crazy." He slammed a fist against his own temple, a brutal self-punishing gesture that Kaiser immediately intercepted, nudging his wet nose forcefully into Lockie's hand until the fist unclenched. "Mental hold permanent. If I am locked up, he gets power of attorney," he promised. The fragmentation of Lockie's speech painted a clearer picture than any eloquent legal brief. It was a story as old as time, Cain and Abel rewritten for the modern era with inheritances and disability checks as the currency of betrayal. Tilly felt a cold fury rising in her chest, a vastly different heat than the Outback sun. She remembered the officers who had come to her door. They had been strangers, yet they treated her with more compassion in her worst moment than this boy's own blood was showing him now. "He ain't no brother," Tilly growled, her eyes narrowing as she watched the Holden inch closer to her rear bumper. "Family don't hunt family down like a dog in the street." Lockie let out a sound that was half sob, half hysterical laugh. He gambled it, all of his. Now he needs mine. Broad Vinny. Vinny is bad, not a doctor, has a gun. The mention of a gun changed the tactical landscape instantly. Tilly's hand drifted toward the UHF radio, but she hesitated. Out here, reception was spotty at best, and by the time the highway patrol mobilized to this desolate stretch, whatever was going to happen would already be over. She was on her own. She looked back at the photograph of Ben on her visor. "What would you do, love?" Ben would have stood his ground. Ben would have fought. "Listen to me, Lockie," Tilly said, her voice hardening with a command presence she hadn't used in years. I don't care what papers he has or what lies he told you. You are an Australian soldier. You survived worse than a greedy brother in a fancy car. You hear me? Lockie blinked, the fog of panic clearing momentarily at the familiar title. He looked at Tilly, really looked at her for the first time, seeing not just a truck driver, but a woman who understood the weight of the uniform. Yes, ma'am, Lockie whispered, a faint echo of discipline returning. Suddenly, the Kenworth lurched violently forward. The impact was deafening inside the cab, a massive metallic clang that shuddered up through the chassis, rattling teeth and tossing loose items around the sleeper berth. Kaiser barked sharply, bracing his legs to keep from being thrown into the dashboard. Lockie cried out, curling into a defensive ball, his hands flying back to cover his ears. In the mirror, Tilly saw the Holden recoil from the impact. Its front grille crumpled against the unforgiving reinforced steel of the heavy-duty bumper on the back of Tilly's trailer. Julian had not just tapped them, he had rammed them at 100 kilometers an hour. It was an act of supreme desperation or total insanity. The Holden swerved wildly for a moment before Julian regained control, smoke beginning to drift from its smashed radiator. He was not stopping, he was speeding up again. Hang on, Tilly roared, gripping the wheel to keep the heavy beast steady on the bitumen. The predator had drawn first blood, and the sanctuary of the cab was no longer inviolate. The hunt had just turned into a battle. The impact had turned the desolate highway into a war zone, and Julian O'Neill was fighting dirty. In the mirrors, Tilly could see the Holden weaving aggressively, its smashed front end looking like the snarling maw of some mechanized beast. Julian was not just tailgating anymore. He was probing for weaknesses, surging forward to ride alongside the trailer's massive wheels, trying to intimidate Tilly into pulling over, or worse, trying to find an angle to force the road train off the road. It was suicide, but rage had clearly overridden whatever self-preservation instincts the man possessed. Tilly held the Kenworth steady, her forearms locked like iron bars. 30 years on the road had taught her that physics was always on the side of the heavier vehicle. Provided you did not panic. He is trying to get alongside, Tilly warned, her voice calm but tight as a drum skin. Kaiser, get down. The dog, sensing the shift in gravity as Tilly swerved slightly to block the Holden's advance, dropped low into the footwell, pressing his body firmly against Lockie's shaking legs. Lockie was catatonic now, hands clamped over his ears, eyes squeezed shut against the terrifying reality that his own brother was trying to kill him. Then the Outback turned on them. It did not begin with rain. It began with the wind. A sudden, violent gust slammed into the side of the trailer, acting like a giant sail and shoving the entire rig a meter toward the center line. The sky ahead, previously a relentless expanse of bleached blue, turned a bruised, angry purple in seconds. A wall of dust, a red dust storm, was rolling across the plain, a kilometer-high tsunami of sand that swallowed the horizon whole and raced toward them at terrifying speed. Hang on, Tilly roared just as they hit the wall. The world went instantly dark, an apocalyptic orange-brown twilight where visibility dropped to zero. Sand blasted the windshield with the sound of a million tiny, frantic hands trying to get in. Tilly knew she had mere seconds before the radio signal would be completely dead. Swallowed by the interference of the storm, she grabbed the UHF radio mic, her thumb mashing the transmit button while she steered with her left hand, fighting the crosswinds that threatened to jackknife the trailers. Emergency, emergency, any station, this is Kenworth westbound on Eyre Highway. Mile marker, damn it, somewhere east of the border. I am under attack by a black Holden. Occupants armed. I have a soldier in distress on board. Emergency. Static hissed back at her, a deafening white noise that offered no confirmation. She did not know if anyone heard her in the vast emptiness. But it was a lifeline thrown into the void. She tossed the mic down just as the dust turned to mud. The rain hit with the force of a hammer strike. It was not standard rainfall. It was a deluge, an outback downpour that the parched ground could not absorb. Within moments, the highway was covered in a treacherous sheen of water and oil. The temperature plummeted 20 degrees in as many seconds. Inside the cab, the windows fogged instantly, sealing them in a grey, suffocating bubble. Tilly cranked the wipers to their highest setting, but they fought a losing battle against the torrent. The Kenworth, usually so sure-footed, began to feel light, hydroplaning precariously on the slick surface. Behind them, the Holden's headlights were twin demon eyes in the gloom, momentarily blinded by the spray kicked up by Tilly's wheels. But Julian did not back off. If anything, the storm emboldened him, giving him cover. He surged forward again, this time coming up fast on the driver's side. Ignoring the blinding spray, he was dangerously close to the steer tires. If he hit those, it was game over, they would flip. Tilly reacted on pure instinct. jerking the wheels slightly to the left, a maneuver meant to scare the smaller car off. It worked, momentarily forcing Julian onto the soft, muddy shoulder, but the Holden fishtail edged wildly and clawed its way back onto the pavement. Just then, a new sound cut through the roaring wind and rain, a sickening metallic cough from deep within the Kenworth's engine bay. Tilly's eyes snapped to the instrument cluster. The tachometer needle was wavering erratically. The massive diesel engine, usually a relentless powerhouse, sputtered. It was starved for air, choking on the sheer volume of water being sucked into the intakes. Or perhaps the electrical system had finally succumbed to the deluge. A horrifying constellation of red warning lights suddenly illuminated the dashboard. Check engine, water in fuel, low oil pressure. No, not now, you stubborn old girl, Tilly pleaded, pumping the accelerator, but there was no response. The guttural roar of the engine died down to a pathetic rasping wheeze. The massive beast began to coast, rapidly losing the momentum that was their only defense. The power steering became sluggish, heavy, fighting Tilly's every attempt to keep him straight on the slick road. They were dead in the water, a sitting duck in the middle of a monsoon, and the predator behind them had just smelled blood. The Kenworth was dying. What had once been a symphony of raw, unbridled horsepower was now a pathetic, sputtering cough that shook the entire chassis with violent convulsions. The red warning lights on the dashboard were no longer just warnings. They were a death sentence written in leads. Tilly fought the steering wheel, which had become a sluggish dead weight in her hands as the power assist failed, turning every minor correction on the slick bitumen into a Herculean effort. She watched the speedometer needle drop. 40, 35, 30. They were hemorrhaging momentum, bleeding out speed in the middle of a deluge that showed no sign of mercy. Behind them, the black Holden, despite its own damage, sensed the weakness. Julian accelerated, the predatory snout of his vehicle inching closer to the rear bumper, ready to deliver a final crippling blow that would send him spinning into the flooded saltbush. Tilly knew they would not survive another hit like the last one. Not at this reduced speed, not on this treacherous surface. The highway, once their escape route, had become a trap. She needed an out, a variable that Julian's sleek, low-slung urban missile was not designed for. Her eyes, squinting through the frantic slap of the windshield wipers, searched the grey blur of the roadside until they latched onto a barely visible break in the scrub. A rusted, bullet-riddled signpost that marked an old station track. It was little more than a glorified goat trail used for fence maintenance. Untamed and likely turned to soup by the storm. But it was their only chance. Hang on, Tilly growled, terrified that she was about to make a fatal mistake. But knowing that staying the course was certain suicide, she did not signal. She just hauled the massive steering wheel hard to the right. The road train groaned in protest, its tires screaming momentarily before they left the pavement and hit the saturated desert floor. The transition was brutal. The cab lurched violently, tossing Lockie against the passenger door with a sickening thud. Kaiser, displaying incredible agility, managed to keep his footing, instantly wedging himself back into the footwell to brace his handler. The smooth, albeit slippery, ride of the highway was instantly replaced by bone-jarring chaos. The track was a slurry of red mud and sharp rocks hidden beneath inches of standing water. The Kenworth, laden with its heavy load of steel, immediately sank several inches. The tires, designed for long-haul highway efficiency, fought for purchase in the primordial muck, churning the earth into a thick reddish paste. They were moving, but barely. It was a slow, agonizing crawl, a mechanical beast wounded and limping away from a relentless hunter. Tilly kept her foot feathered on the accelerator, praying the torque would be enough to keep him from bogging down completely, while simultaneously begging the drowning engine not to give up the ghost just yet. In the passenger seat, Lockie's fragile hold on reality finally snapped. The violent motion of the truck, the roar of the storm, and the inescapable proximity of his brother combined into a perfect storm of triggers. He was not in Australia anymore. He was back in a bushmaster, flipping over an IED crater in some godforsaken province. He curled into a fetal position, his hands clamped over his ears so tightly his knuckles turned the color of old bone, rocking back and forth while emitting a low, keening sound that was barely human. It was the sound of a soul being flayed alive by memory. Ranger, realizing that passive comfort was no longer enough, sprang into action. He did not just offer support now. He went on the offensive against his handler's demons. He stood over Lockie, facing backward toward the sleeper berth window, towards the threat they had just left behind. His hackles were fully raised, transforming him into a creature twice his size, and he let out a continuous thundering barrage of barks that reverberated inside the small steel cab. It was not just noise, it was a declaration. I am here, they will not pass me. Tilly risked a glance in her side mirror. What she saw was both terrifying and grimly satisfying. Julian had not given up. The black Holden had followed them off the pavement, a testament to the blinding rage driving the man. But the Outback was exacting its price. The low-slung sports car was spectacularly ill-suited for this terrain. It was plowing through the mud rather than driving over it. Its front spoiler acted like a bulldozer blade, scooping up heavy red sludge. Tilly could see the car violently bottoming out, sparks flying even in the rain as its undercarriage smashed against hidden rocks. It fishtailed wildly, sliding almost 90 degrees before Julian managed to wrestle it back straight. It was slower than the truck now, wounded and struggling, but still relentlessly coming. "He is insane," Tilly muttered, struck by the sheer malice it took to destroy your own vehicle just to hurt your own blood. Ahead, through the curtain of rain, a dark shape emerged, the creek bed. It was usually dry as a bone, a jagged gash in the earth. But currently, it was raging with flash floodwater, a churning torrent of brown liquid violence. Spanning it was a narrow wooden bridge, ancient and weathered, looking terrifyingly fragile under the onslaught of the storm. It was a single lane, barely wider than Tilly's rig. If they could cross it, the Holden might not be able to follow without getting washed away. It was the finish line. "Come on, old girl, just a little further," Tilly coaxed the dying engine. The Kenworth wheezed, lurching forward in agonizing spasms. 10 meters, 5 meters, the front tires hit the wooden decking of the bridge with a hollow, ominous rumble, and then silence. It was not a quiet silence. The rain still hammered the roof. The floodwaters still roared below. But the mechanical heart of the truck had stopped. The engine did not just stall. It seized with a final violent shudder that rocked the whole rig before everything went dead. No power steering, no lights, no hope of restarting. They had made it onto the bridge. But only just. The cab was on the wooden structure. But the trailers stretched back onto the muddy bank, completely and utterly blocking the only way across. They were not safe. They were trapped. The silence of the dead engine was instantly replaced by the drumming of rain on the cab's roof. A frantic tribal rhythm that matched the pounding in Lockie's chest. "Stay here," Tilly commanded, her voice leaving no room for argument. She was not just a truck driver anymore. She was the unbreakable barrier between a traumatized boy and the world that wanted to consume him. She grabbed a heavy tire lever from beside her seat. A lethal, solid steel bar designed for changing heavy truck tires, but equally effective for shattering bone. She cracked the driver's side door open, and the storm immediately tried to rip it from its hinges. Stepping out onto the rain-slicked wooden decking of the bridge, Tilly felt the ancient structure shudder under the combined assault of the rushing floodwaters below and the dead weight of her rig above. She was standing on a precipice in every sense of the word. 20 meters back, where the muddy soup of the track met the bridge, the black Holden had finally succumbed. It was buried to its axles in the red sludge, its engine steaming and dead. The driver's door flew open, and Julian O'Neill emerged into the deluge. He was a portrait of white-collar desperation gone feral. He wore what had once been a $3,000 suit, now ruined by mud and sweat, clinging to his frame like a sodden shroud. His expensive loafers slid helplessly in the muck as he scrambled toward the bridge. His face twisted into a mask of manic fury. In his right hand, he gripped a metal baseball bat, its aluminium surface gleaming dully in the grey light. He did not look like a confident businessman anymore. He looked like a cornered rat, dangerous because he had no other options. "Get out of the way, you old hag," Julian screamed over the roar of the water, brandishing the bat. "You have no idea what you are interfering with." Tilly walked slowly to the end of the trailer, placing herself squarely in the center of the narrow bridge, blocking Julian's path to the cab. She stood tall, a monolith of rain-soaked flannel and resolve, holding the tire lever loosely at her side. She did not shout. She did not need to. Her presence was enough. "Drop it and stand down," Tilly said, the terminology slipping out unconsciously, channeled from years of listening to Ben. "This ends here, Julian. Turn around and walk away while you still can." Julian stopped 3 meters away, breathing heavily, rain plastering his thinning hair to his skull. "Walk away? I can't walk away. That freak in your cab owes me. He has ruined everything." "He owes you nothing but the blood you share," Tilly retorted, her voice cutting through the storm. She took a step forward, ignoring the bat raised threateningly in Julian's shaking hands. "You see this?" Tilly tapped her own chest over the heart, where beneath her layers of clothes, Ben's dog tags always hung. "My boy Ben, he was a soldier, just like your brother. He died in a desert thousands of kilometers from here because he believed in something bigger than himself. He died for honor, for his mates." Tilly's eyes, hard as flint, bored into Julian's wavering gaze. "And you You are here trying to steal the honor of your own flesh and blood because you couldn't manage your own greed. You are spitting on everything he sacrificed for." The words hit Julian harder than the bat ever could. For a fraction of a second, the manic rage slipped, revealing the terrified, pathetic man beneath. The bat lowered slightly. He looked past Tilly at the silent truck cab, perhaps remembering a time when Lockie was not just a payday, but a little brother. I don't have a choice," Julian stammered, his voice cracking. "Everyone has a choice," Tilly said, softer now. "He really doesn't, actually." The new voice was calm, cold, and terrifyingly clear. It did not belong to Julian. The passenger door of the ruined Holden had opened quietly, and a second man stepped out. If Julian was the picture of hot, messy desperation, this man was pure Arctic ice. He was Vinny. He was perhaps 40, wiry and compact, moving with an efficient, predatory grace that did not waste a single calorie of energy. He wore simple, dark clothes that were functional and expensive, unaffected by the rain. His face was painfully nondescript, the kind of face you would forget 5 seconds after seeing it in a crowd. Except for his eyes, they were pale, almost colorless, devoid of empathy or anger. They were simply dead. He did not carry a bat. In his right hand, held low and steady against his thigh, was a Glock 19 pistol. "Julian likes to talk," Vinny said, walking leisurely through the mud until he stood beside the trembling brother. He looked at Tilly with mild, detached interest, like an exterminator evaluating a particularly stubborn termite infestation. "He talks a lot. Told me his war hero brother was an easy mark. Told me he could liquidate the trust in 48 hours if we just got him committed." Vinny sighed, a small puff of white mist in the cold air. "Julian owes me a great deal of money. 6 figures. And I am not a bank. Mrs. Hogan, I don't offer refinancing options." The stakes had just shifted violently from a family dispute to a professional execution. Tilly tightened her grip on the tire lever, knowing it was useless against a 9mm at this distance. "You are making a mistake," Tilly warned, her eyes locked on the gun. "The only mistake was trusting Julian to handle this cleanly," Vinny replied, raising the weapon. He did not aim it like a gangster in a movie. He aimed it like a professional. Two-handed, steady, center mass. The black bore of the muzzle looked like an endless tunnel. Plan A was the hospital. Plan B was an unfortunate car accident on the highway. Now we are on Plan C. He gestured vaguely around them at the desolate, storm-ravaged landscape. A tragic breakdown in a flash flood. Bodies wash up miles downstream. Very sad. Now step away from the truck. Old woman, I won't ask twice. The standoff on the bridge seemed to freeze time. The pounding rain counting down the seconds like a doomsday clock. Vinny held the Glock with unwavering stability, a stark contrast to the chaotic elements raging around them. He did not look at Julian, who stood shivering and broken. His cold, dead eyes were fixed on Tilly. "Call him out," Vinny ordered, his voice barely raised, but perfectly audible over the storm. "Tell the hero to come out and save you. If he stays in the cab, I put a bullet in your knee, then your other knee, then your gut. I'll make it last long enough for him to hear every scream." It was a brutally effective threat. Vinny understood exactly what kind of woman Tilly was. The kind who would endure any pain herself but could not bear to watch others suffer on her behalf. Tilly clenched her jaw, the muscles working furiously. She would not do it. She would die on this bridge before she served that boy up to executioners. But she did not have to. Inside the cab, something shifted in Lachlan O'Neill. Through the rain-streaked windshield, he saw the scene play out. The gun aimed at the only person who had shown him kindness without asking for anything in return since he had come home. The sight of the weapon did not trigger panic this time. It triggered training. The paralyzing fog of PTSD momentarily receded, replaced by the cold, hard clarity of combat. A civilian was in distress. Mate in danger. Move. Lockie took a deep, shuddering breath, pushing the terror into a small mental box. Just like he had been taught. He looked at Kaiser. The dog was already alert, muscles coiled, sensing the change in his handler's demeanor. "Watch," Lockie whispered, the command solid and sure. He did not wait for Tilly to call him. He kicked the passenger door open, the heavy steel swinging wide into the storm. "Don't shoot her," Lockie shouted, his voice raw but steady as he stepped down onto the slick wooden planks. His hands raised clearly above his head. He walked slowly toward the center of the bridge, ignoring the rushing water below. His eyes locked on Vinny. "I am here, let her go, this is between us." Vinny smiled, a thin, humorless curving of his lips. He had exactly what he wanted. He slowly pivoted away from Tilly, bringing the muzzle of the Glock around to bear on Lockie's chest. "Professional courtesy, kid," Vinny said. "I'll make it quick." It was the final betrayal that broke Julian O'Neill. Seeing his little brother, gaunt, terrified, yet bravely offering himself up to save a stranger, shattered whatever wall of greed and resentment he had built around his conscience. He remembered teaching Lockie to ride a bike. He remembered Lockie looking up at him with hero worship in his eyes before he shipped out to basic training. What have I become? The thought was so horrifying it spurred him into action before his brain could process the danger. With a roar that was equal parts rage and self-loathing, Julian launched himself at Vinny. It was not a practiced takedown. It was a desperate, clumsy tackle fueled by a lifetime of regret. He hit the smaller man from the side just as Vinny's finger tightened on the trigger. The gun went off with a deafening crack, the bullet chewing harmlessly into the wooden decking as the three men collided. Tilly lunged forward to help, but the slick surface of the bridge betrayed them all. They went down in a tangle of limbs, mud, and freezing water. Vinny, despite his size, was a trained fighter. He viciously drove an elbow into Julian's nose, shattering cartilage and sending him sprawling backward, blood mingling with the rain on his ruined suit. Tilly tried to grab Vinny's gun arm, but Vinny kicked out with savage precision, catching the older woman squarely in the bad knee she often complained about. Tilly buckled, roaring in pain. Vinny scrambled to his feet, panting slightly, his icy composure momentarily cracked but unbroken. He still had the gun. He spun toward Lockie, who was frozen, unarmed, 3 meters away. Messy, Vinny hissed, wiping mud from his eyes with his free hand. I hate messy. Goodbye, digger. He raised the Glock again, leveling it squarely between Lockie's eyes. There was no time for Tilly to get up, no time for Julian to intervene again. It was over. But Vinny had made one critical miscalculation. He had forgotten the fourth combatant. A black and tan blur exploded from the open cab of the Kenworth. Kaiser cleared the distance in 2 massive, powerful bounds, moving faster than human reaction time. He did not bark. This was not a warning. It was a neutralization. 40 kilograms of focused canine fury hit Vinny square in the chest just as he braced to fire. Kaiser's jaws, capable of exerting hundreds of pounds of pressure, clamped onto Vinny's right forearm. The gun arm, there was a sickening crunch of bone-meeting teeth. Vinny screamed, a sound of pure agony that drowned out the storm, and convulsively pulled the trigger. Bang! The second shot went wild, tearing a hole in the dark, stormy sky. Kaiser did not let go. He thrashed his head violently, using his body weight to drag the assassin to the ground, shaking him like a rag doll until the Glock flew from Vinny's useless, mangled hand and skidded across the bridge, disappearing over the edge into the raging floodwaters below. Almost simultaneously, a new sound cut through the diminishing rain. The wail of sirens, not one, but several, highway patrol units, responding to a frantic, static-filled emergency call from a truckie on the Eyre Highway, were approaching from the east, their red and blue lights painting the wet outback in surreal strobes. Vinny, broken and bleeding, stopped fighting as Kaiser stood over him, a low, lethal growl rumbling continuously in the dog's throat, teeth bared inches from Vinny's throat. Julian sat up in the mud, holding his broken nose, weeping openly, not from pain, but from a strange, overwhelming relief. He looked at Lockie, who was kneeling beside Tilly, helping the old truckie sit up. I am sorry, Lockie, Julian sobbed, the words barely intelligible. I am so sorry. The aftermath was a blur of flashing lights and radios. Vinny was taken away in handcuffs, heavily sedated for the pain in his ruined arm. Julian surrendered without a word. His head hung low, accepting the cuffs as penance. Before they put him in the cruiser, he asked the sergeant for 1 minute. He did not ask for a lawyer. He asked to look his brother in the eye one last time. You were right, Julian said to Tilly, who stood beside Lockie, supporting the young veteran. He is a hero. And I have a long time to think about what honor means. Tilly did not press charges against Lockie for the damage to the truck. Instead, she drove them to the nearest safe town once the rig was jump-started by the patrol cars. She bought Lockie a hot meal and got him a motel room. She did not leave them there, though. She stayed until Lockie's Department of Veterans Affairs caseworker, a real one this time, was contacted and en route. 6 months later, Tilly pulled into a roadhouse in Western Australia overlooking the Indian Ocean. The salty air was a nice change from the desert dust. She checked her mail at the dedicated trucker box. There was a postcard with a picture of a golden beach. On the back, in handwriting that was much steadier than it had been that day in the cab. It read, Tilly, the ocean helps with the noise. Kaiser likes the sand. We started a program training pups for guys coming home. We named the first one Ben. Thank you for the ride. Mates forever, Lockie and Kaiser. Tilly smiled, a genuine expression that reached her tired eyes. She tucked the postcard onto the visor next to Ben's picture. The road was still long and mostly lonely. But sometimes, just sometimes, you found something worth stopping for. Sometimes miracles do not look like parting seas or burning bushes. Sometimes a miracle is an old truck engine starting when it shouldn't. Or a loyal dog sensing danger before it happens. Sometimes the miracle is simply a stranger who decides not to look away when we are at our lowest. Matilda Hogan thought she was just driving a truck, carrying her grief like a heavy load across the Nullarbor. But God had a different route planned for her that day. She was placed exactly where she needed to be, at exactly the right moment, to be an answer to Lachlan O'Neill's desperate prayer. It reminds us that even in our own brokenness, we can be used for a greater purpose. We are never truly alone on our journey. Help can arrive in the most unexpected forms on the loneliest of roads. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to share it with someone who might need a reminder that they are not alone. Leave a comment below and let us know where you are watching from. If you believe that miracles still happen through the kindness of strangers and the loyalty of our four-legged friends, type Amen in the comments. May God bless you and keep you safe on your own journey. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories of hope, courage, and faith.